Get started. Thanks for joining us today for our live video chat about the mobile secondary market. My name is Melissa Geringer, and I oversee communications for bstock and will be serving as moderator for today's discussion. As we get into the chat, please feel free to use the portal on your screen to send in questions via the Q&A tab on your toolbar, and we'll plan to do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to welcome our host, Sean Cleland, Director of Mobile at bstock. Sean is an industry leader and subject matter authority in every aspect of pre-owned and refurbished consumer electronics, mobile devices, and video games, including retail operations, reverse logistics, refurbishment, and statistical modeling. At bstock, Sean serves as the executive point of contact for all the company's mobile clients, providing guidance and strategies on how they can successfully navigate the mobile secondary market. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Melissa, and for all those attendees, appreciate you joining today. We're really excited to talk about the mobile secondary market, and on behalf of our bstock in total and our mobile team, welcome. Without further ado, I'll jump right in. So we want to talk about a few things today. We want to talk about the mobile secondary market in general, what we see from a trend perspective, what we see happening from a client level, service level, and a product level. And we want to get into specifically talking about best practices and things that we've learned when navigating the secondary market. When we're talking about the mobile secondary market, we're talking now about something that is extremely significant. In 2017, you'll see there were over 180 million used phones traded in just last year. And that's just the trade-in portion of the industry. It's estimated that the mobile secondary market right now is somewhere in the ballpark of $20 to $25 billion in value. And along with that 180 million used phones traded in, the ASP, or the average selling price or average trade price of those devices, is going up as well. The estimate in 2017 is that the average was around $140. That's a big difference from when I started in this world. One of the things that I find most staggering is that the devices are living a much longer life than they did before, especially in the domestic market. In the United States, it's estimated that the average iPhone 8 and iPhone X is going to have about 3 different users over its lifespan. I think that's very compelling, especially from those days of when you were done with the phone, you would just throw it in a bin or throw it in a drawer and let it gather dust or hand it down to your kids. Those days are gone. We're monetizing phones as consumers. So now the consumer is just trading it in and out of habit. What we see is that the subsidy market, that disappearing, and the carriers going to almost insurance plan, trade-in plan, trade-up plans, is really spearheading the growth in this marketplace. It's estimated that the used smartphone market is going to grow 4 to 5x faster than the market in general. And I think that's trade and reuse of devices is what's growing that the most, obviously. But those changes in the upgrade cycle and the changes in these trade-in programs is really the catalyst. That changes the secondary market as well. The product that's coming in has a lot more value, like we see in that ASP. And we're seeing both the service providers, the carriers, and the other major OEMs are varying their secondary market channels. It's kind of compressed. The secondary market compressed a while ago from the wild west that it used to be. But we're seeing that the usage of the secondary market is really being optimized. And when I say that the folks with a lot of inventory are using the channels that we list here. We've seen a prolific growth of the direct-to-consumer market because it's so much easier, specifically in the United States, to monetize a secondary market device. It's a lot easier for a consumer to activate these devices. Direct-to-consumer and B2C has seen great growth. Now, there are challenges and restrictions that come along with that. There's a lot, specifically on Amazon, a lot of restrictions coming in on quality and condition and how the secondary market utilizes B2C is constantly evolving. And really that comes out of consumer protection. So it's great for the consumer, but can be very challenging in the secondary market. A kind of a step back from there, what's feeding a lot of these secondary market things is the remanufacture, refurbishment, and wholesale in general. There's some sellers that just need volume constantly, and wholesale will always be alive. We see a very thriving set of wholesalers out there. When we look at things from a bstock point of view, we see the growth of the B2B marketplace as well. The days of, hey, I'm going to send out a spreadsheet, I'm going to go solicit bids, it's a very manual process. It's become extremely tedious, and the growth of B2B marketplaces has been another big change in the mobile secondary market. What we see at bstock is also a fundamental company change as well. The carriers and those with a lot of inventory need to have controls in place. There is a high priority for risk aversion. So no matter what channel you're selling through, risk aversion is just paramount. When we're talking about the B2B space, I want to dive into specifically some of the things that we've learned to help mitigate that risk. And I'm going to do that by demonstrating through just kind of a marketplace that we set up. This is just for demonstration, not real inventory, but using it as a means to kind of show you what we've learned to help folks avoid the risk that's out there. This is kind of right out of the bstock playbook, one of our marketplaces. Many of our marketplaces look just like this when it's mobile centric. And we help those that need to sell inventory and buyers that are doing the right things. We help them source the right inventory by putting some controls in place. You'll notice that I have an R2 only category as a piece of this marketplace. We're going to talk about that specifically here in a moment. But there's many things that companies can do to avoid risk. One of those is just flat out being transparent. Hey, what has been done to the devices? How are they processed? What's being done to protect the consumer? Being transparent and calling those things out when selling things secondary is key. I mentioned R2 a second ago. We are very pro R2 here at bstock. Many of our clients require R2 for certain product categories or certain product conditions even. You'll notice that I've got a couple auctions here that are R2 only. What we do is put controls and measures in place to ensure that the right buyers are seeing the right inventory. In my login for this marketplace, for example, I'm logged in as a sample company that is R2 certified. So because I hold that credential, I'm allowed to see this product that's for sale. And we'll dive into some of the transparency here in a second, but I want to talk about the kind of risk aversion things at a high level, what we see changing in the secondary market and what we encourage. So data sanitization has been huge in the mobile secondary market for a long time. What we're seeing is a fundamental change from when the data wiping happens. Data wiping used to be, hey, the OEM or the carrier or whoever has the inventory upstream is going to do all of this data sanitization. We're seeing that it's being pushed a little lower into the process, whether it's going to service providers, R2 vetted companies. The need for those processes is happening more and more at service houses. We also have seen a growth of redundancy. This adds cost to the marketplace, but when risk aversion is such a big deal, we're seeing data wiping happening multiple steps through the logistics chain, from acquisition from the customer or right at the return to when it's ingested into a facility, when it comes out, and even putting restrictions in the downstream as well. So that commitment to the consumer privacy is becoming more and more paramount and pushing further and further into service providers and those purchasing the inventory. Recycling is obviously a big piece as well. the focus on bringing recycling domestic, ensuring that the commodities and scrap and reuse of parts, that it's authentic, that it's done cleanly, that it's done ethically has become paramount. So one of the biggest thing we've seen is a push for R2. And R2 covers a lot of the data wiping and recycling aspects. For those of you who aren't familiar with R2, I would highly recommend looking into it. It's run by a nonprofit that's listed there on the screen. If you'd like to learn more, please check out their website or feel free to reach out to me. So what I want to do is go back into the marketplace and describe some more of those transparency things that I mentioned before. So what we learn in the secondary market to optimize not only or to avoid risk, but also to optimize the average selling price or what you're getting for the product, there's a few key things. And it all really boils down to transparency. You can see, back to this R2 example, we're calling out specifically, what is the product? If it's locked to a carrier, what carrier is it on? Get me a clean unit count, give me a condition, and put everything in front of the buyer so that they have all the tools necessary to make an educated decision on what they can pay for the product. What we find is the more information, the more reliable the information, and the more consistent that information, the more a buyer is willing to pay, the more buyers will engage, and the more buyers will come and repeat purchase as well. One of the biggest things is calling out a specific manifest. You'll see this is another one of our best practices, calling out a manifest right there, enabling a buyer to download it. Those are all key steps in ensuring that the transparency is there. When we get into specifics, there's also things like what's been done to the product. In this example, there's been some IMEI ESN testing. There's a very quick description of condition. But what we encourage clients to do, because not only does it make themselves look good, but it also helps the buyers make more educated purchasing decisions, is to have a very clean set of conditions. This is a very simple example of what that looks like. We see a lot more detail out there. It's a little harder to be consistent when your detail is very great, but at a minimum, I think the market agrees upon these 4 tiers as the standards for conditioning. When called out, it really puts rails around what's being done, what to expect when purchasing. And because there is some level of a universal condition here, new buyers and people unfamiliar to the product stream are going to come in with some level of knowledge and expectation. If that meets market, it makes it a very easy transition when looking at product. We see right now the development of a more unified and universal conditioning code. This has been an industry push that has been talked about for a while, but we're seeing a major change happening right now. CTIA is spearheading a very detailed version of this. It's still being documented, but we anticipate that the market is going to shift very quickly to a set of condition codes that will align by all the major players, and then the downstream from there will adapt to it as well. At a high level, we anticipate it to look like this. This today is just the basic rails of what's expected out there. And we see this developing into something a little more technical over time, but ultimately will help all of us as we participate in the downstream. So this again is another example of just the transparency that needs to be here to optimize the secondary market. Another thing that we see time to time, we go in and we work with clients to really coach how to sell at scale. There's a big difference between a recovery rate and maintaining velocity. What we are experiencing today is much more sophistication at the OEM and at the carrier level when it comes to disposition. At bstock, we're helping to coach this disposition because there's always opportunities to make more money on the device, but maintaining velocity and a careful watch of weeks of supply is also vital. So we've learned some auction strategies to maximize that. I'll show that in a minute when I get back to the marketplace. One of the ways we do that is by catering to buyers of all sizes. Many of you know the secondary market, know it well, but there's buyers that can handle tens of thousands of devices and some that can handle hundreds. Having a diverse buyer base, yet still controlled with the settings and certifications we spoke of before, really maximizes this mix of, hey, I need to move at velocity, but yes, I also want to maximize what I'm receiving for the product. It also engages buyers to help them grow. That's one of the really neat things we've seen at bstock over the years. We've seen smaller scale buyers come in, start buying low quantities, maximize their supply chain, and grow. But along the way, we want to make sure that there's inventory and volume that caters to that. So it's something that we work with both sides of the transaction to do. We've also learned quite a bit about optimization of the grouping of phones. We'll demonstrate that in a second when I get back over to the marketplace. But there's some OEMs or some manufacturers where how the quantity of the lot, there's still going to be great demand. In many cases, we may want to drill down to specific gig sizes, carriers, different condition levels. There's all different ways to maximize what value is coming through on that device just by sorting to demand. And that demand is constantly changing, so flexibility of lotting and grouping is key. And all that blends into auction strategy, which we push quite a bit. The marketplace, when I jump back over here, you'll notice that in our example here, this is very much like real life, but we are varying quantity here to maximize the attention that this inventory creates and also maximize volume. There's some lots here, right? 1,250 units, 100 unit lots, 650. We do variants of this nature to ensure that we're meeting buyers at their level. We also vary the content as well. You'll see that there's accessories, consumer electronics, and what we find many times is even small quantities of something like this, an Apple smartwatch at 307 units, it still creates buzz. There's ways to bring in inventory to really excite the marketplace, and it generates interest in other product as well. So not only do we want to cater to many different buyers, we also want to make something merchandisable, a marketplace that has excitement, has an e-commerce to it, and still pushes. There's different buyer communities as well. And what we've learned is that maximizing how lots are built to what the product condition is really will maximize recovery. From a downstream perspective, you've got mom and pop shops that are looking for inventory, smaller MVNOs, refurbishment companies, recycling companies, those that need to supply corporations, ITADs, you name it. The downstream is so diverse that there's many different ways to cut up this inventory. When it comes to the D and C grade that are maybe only going to R2 companies, you want really deep quantities in a specific SKU so that they can get the parts they need and the labor in place to refurbish. But then again, the fully functional stuff, that we want to break that up into smaller lots of really high demand things that the most buyers have a shot at it. So catering to different buyer communities is another way that we optimize the marketplace. One of the biggest things that we've seen a shift in over the years is where this product goes. Like I mentioned in the beginning, with the growth of the domestic market, specifically in pre-owned, the global base has compressed a little bit. These phones aren't all going to Hong Kong like they used to. There's many staying in the United States. At the same time, there's this broad global appetite for secondary market devices. What I have on the screen all the different countries that we sold cell phone inventory into last year, you can see how broad it is. And we see this emergence of Dubai and India, and Brazil has been an incredible source of attention over the last few months. So while there is this global demand still, we see it compressed in the domestic market because of that huge growth of the use of devices. You know, if an iPhone 8 is going to be used 3 times, we see a lot of that happening in the United States alone. You know, really circling back here, the opportunity in the mobile secondary market is large, and with it being estimated at upwards of $25 billion, there's great inventory to be had. Trade-in is driving a ton of that. Consumer protection is driving kind of the condensing of who can play and how. And we really see a lot of growth in this marketplace. This year, we anticipate about a 50% growth year over year on units traded in the United States, which means there's significant opportunity. There's also going to be great opportunity for devices that are returned and refurbished as well. Sophisticated processes are being put in place. We see the carriers becoming more and more sophisticated with how they handle the product, where it goes and who it goes to. And we'll continually keep an eye on that. And we know that the used is becoming a big deal. It's pushing double-digit percentage of sales as a market penetration, and it's only going to go up. So we're excited about the mobile secondary market. We'll continue to share insights when we have them. We would be happy to answer questions, and we'll continue the conversation over the coming months. But I'll pause and take some time for a Q&A. Again, thank you for joining. And look forward to answering some questions.
Thanks so much, Sean. Let's go ahead and jump into the Q&A. Again, and if you have any questions, please, you can use the Q&A button on your toolbar. If you just toggle over the screen, it should go ahead and pop up. You can use the chat button as well. But first question for you, Sean, how do you find all these buyers?
Yeah, good question. It's actually been years of work. At bstock, in my personal experience, we found buyers through just working trade shows, amounts of advertising as well. Working, as a larger company in the space, we can go out and do some marketing from a search engine optimization, PPC type things. There's been a lot of relationship-driven growth. Meeting people through certain companies. LinkedIn is a constant source of buyers. I find that there's not a day that doesn't go by with somebody not reaching out to me on LinkedIn, looking for inventory. There's different groups on there as well. So there's a lot of channels. Some of them are pretty old school, but we find buyers really all over the place. And there's a lot of cross-pollination as well as some of these markets become more sophisticated. Buyers are learning about them as they go and finding them themselves. So there's many different ways that we're finding buyers these days.
Great, thank you. Next question. What if I only want my phones and devices to be sold within the US? How do I control that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not uncommon. From our experiences, it's something that is relatively easy to limit from a first step. The control of where that product ships. That's another way that R2 has helped too. Many of those R2 certified companies are domestic. They do have a global audience, but there's certain marketplaces we run that are domestic and R2 only. And it's something that systematically bstock can check. We check it through force the shipping. We're checking addresses. It's really a functional core competency of what we do. On the flip side of that, we even have marketplaces that are export only, where we only accept addresses of registrants that are exporting. So there are some functional controls that can be put in place to control that.
Thank you. And there was kind of a follow-up question to that. So what is the hottest or largest international market for cell phone buyers right now?
Sure. I mean, Hong Kong is always still a huge consumer of secondary devices. The markets there, inventory hits there and spreads all over the place. We are seeing growth, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, in Dubai, India, Eastern Europe. We've even seen some Northern Africa come into play too. I think because there's so many messaging services out there, the devices of interest are pretty broad. Yeah, those are the big ones that stick out in my mind.
Okay, thank you. Next question: what kind of pricing can I expect?
Yeah, good question. Man, the mobile secondary market is pretty fluid. I think there's a little bias in my answer here, but having an auction and having a dynamic and robust buyer base ensures that there is some level of market pricing knowledge at all times. We see from our data that there's almost a consistency to the degradation of a device. Yes, there are some fluctuations that happen in the secondary market. Yes, there are times where a SKU gets flooded. But what we see is that with an auction that is vibrant, there is a very clear market value that's unique to each seller. Client A's A grade iPhone 7, their pricing is, it's almost trackable. It stays on a very steady curve and things like that, but it's very smooth when you look at the data over time. So pricing expectation in a marketplace is really based on, hey, how many buyers are in there? How active are they? And how transparent and consistent is my product? If a lot of the suggestions that we brought up are followed, then pricing will be, just stellar, market and beyond.
Great, thank you. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Sean, I really appreciate your time today. And if anyone has additional questions, or if we didn't get to your question, you can email Sean. There's his contact info, and you should have my contact info as well from the email invite to the webinar. And I'll also plan to send out a follow-up note to everyone with the presentation included. So again, thank you everyone for taking the time to tune in today. And if you're heading to Mobile World Congress next week, we hope to see you there. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.